Nobody talks about this honestly, but being a young man kind of sucks. You are expected to be confident before you've accomplished anything. You are expected to know how dating works before you've had much experience. You are expected to build a future while still trying to figure out who you are. And when you struggle, most people don't really help. They just tell you to do better. That's why so many young men feel lost today. Not because they're weak, not because they're lazy, but because they're trying to navigate one of the most important stages of life with very little guidance. For most of human history, young men had a clear path into adulthood. There were expectations, responsibilities, and older people who showed them how things worked. You learned by being around people who were already further ahead than you. Whether it was family, work, religion, the military, or your local community, there were structures that helped turn boys into men. A lot of those structures still exist, but they're weaker than they used to be. Many young men now spend more time online than they do around older men they respect. They consume more advice from strangers than from people who actually know them. And when you are trying to figure out how to live, that creates problems. School is often the first place where some boys begin to feel that something isn't working. Many do fine, but many don't, sitting still for hours following instructions and spending most of the day in highly structured environments doesn't suit everyone equally well. When a young man struggles, he often doesn't conclude that the system isn't working for him. He concludes that something is wrong with him. Then comes the next problem. A young man usually starts adult life with very little value in the eyes of society. He has no status, no money, no career, no experience, no reputation. He hasn't had time to build any of those things yet. That's normal, but it doesn't always feel normal when you're living through it. And at the same time, you're surrounded by people displaying the finished product. Social media shows successful entrepreneurs, athletes, influencers, and celebrities. You constantly compare your beginning to someone else's middle, and if you do that long enough, it's easy to feel like you're already behind. Dating doesn't make things easier. Young men are expected to know how to approach, communicate, and build attraction in a world where the rules feel increasingly unclear. Most people learn through trial and error, but modern culture often treats mistakes as evidence of character rather than part of the learning process. Many young men aren't afraid of rejection. They're afraid of humiliation. The result is that some stop trying altogether. What makes this harder is that loneliness has become surprisingly normal. Previous generations spent more time in communities that weren't optional. Family gatherings, local organizations, churches, neighborhoods, and shared social spaces naturally brought people together. Today, many young men spend large parts of their lives alone, even when they're constantly connected online. Human beings need belonging. They need a tribe. They need a place where they feel useful and valued. When that need isn't met in healthy places, people start looking elsewhere. That's where the internet steps in. The internet has become the unofficial mentor for millions of young men. Some of that is genuinely positive. There are people sharing lessons about discipline, fitness, business, relationships, and personal responsibility. Plenty of young men have improved their lives because of things they've learned online. But the internet also attracts people who see lonely and frustrated young men as customers. They understand exactly what these young men want to hear. They tell them that all their problems are somebody else's fault. They offer simple explanations for complicated issues. They package resentment as wisdom and outrage as strength. Most importantly, they promise certainty in a world that feels confusing. And certainty sells. The uncomfortable truth is that many young men aren't looking for someone to agree with them. They're looking for someone to guide them. They want someone who understands what it's like to be 20 years old, uncertain about the future and trying to build a life from scratch. Unfortunately, guidance is harder to monetize than outrage. The conversation around young men often swings between two extremes. One side treats them as victims with no agency, the other treats them as problems that need fixing. Neither approach is particularly helpful. Most young men don't need pity and they don't need condemnation. They need challenge, they need responsibility, they need honest feedback, they need people who believe they're capable of becoming something. Because that's what every generation of young men has always needed. The irony is that most young men aren't asking for special treatment. They're not asking for the world to become easier. They're asking for a map. They're asking for examples. They're asking for someone to explain the rules of a game they're already expected to play. And if nobody respectable is willing to do that, somebody else will. That's the real danger. Not that young men are lost, but that the people most eager to help them find their way often have something to sell. A healthy society doesn't abandon young men and then act surprised when they look for answers elsewhere. It gives them direction before someone else gives them a grievance. Because every capable man you admire today was once an uncertain young man who needed guidance too. The difference is that someone took the time to show him the way.